Dr. Misal, I have a question, and I'd like to pull it into, and you spoke a little bit about this in RMC and sickle cell disease. Are there any essential differences within the presentation between, sickle cell trait and sickle cell disease? And I will say, I just, I've already learned so much during this session right now. I thought RMC was predominantly a trait thing, but now I'm finding out that, people with sickle cell disease are just as much at risk for RMC as people with sickle cell trait. It's just trait is a lot more common than sickle cell disease. So are there any essential differences between, the way it's presented within a sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait? I know you mentioned that the medulla doesn't have or only has the sickle cells, but for us with sickle cell disease, the rest of our kidneys are only dealing with sickle cells, whereas that's different in sickle cell trait. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, no, this is a great thought and a great question. So the numbers of people who have RMC and for all we know have sickle cell disease are small. Now, I'm saying they're small because we know about RMC mainly from the US, because that's where, we've had the most diagnosis. I have no doubt that there are thousands of people in Africa who have RMC and will die of RMC and will never even find out. But, from what we know, the numbers are small, but we haven't observed any clear differences in the behavior of RMC if you have the trait or the disease. Now, presumably, because as you very beautifully pointed out, the kidneys of people who have the disease are different, than the ones that have the trait. In the trait, you see those sickle cells mainly in the medulla. In the disease, it's everywhere in other areas of the kidney. So presumably there might be different patterns on when RMC might happen. And, we have some ideas and thoughts about that, but nothing concrete enough.
Got it. And I don't know if you have, I know you said there's very little data, but just wanted to follow up with just if you have any facts or stats on the prevalence in sickle cell disease.
Yeah, again, small numbers. If anything, it's, as I said, overall, let's think about it this way, whether you have the trait or the disease, from our current understanding, 1 in every 20,000 individuals with either the trait or the disease will develop RMC. And so whether you have the trait or the disease, it's just that from that 20,000 group, most people will have the trait. There might be some evidence, but it's very, very weak evidence. We're still working on it, that RMC may actually be a little bit more common with the disease, which, if you think about it, makes sense because you have much more sickling of the red blood cells. But the fact that there are so many more people with the trait is what obscures this. That's why we used to think that it's a disease only of the trait. It is not a disease only of the trait. It's a disease of any blood chains that can cause the sickling of the red blood cells, whether you have AS or you have SS, since you mentioned it before, or SC, or anything related to S.
That was my next question, if it was more common within, one genotype over the other. But it sounds like, and sickle cell disease is a smaller subset of the people you are, you're working with. But have you seen, it maybe be more common? I know SS is generally cited as the more severe or the most severe form of sickle cell disease. So I don't know if you've seen anything in which.
No, great question. No clear patterns yet. We've seen it with SS, we've seen it with AS, we've seen it with SC, we've seen it with S beta. Any one of the sickling ones can cause it. No clear discernible patterns yet. But we're looking into it. That's the thing. RMC used to be a mystery, complete mystery. It was first described in 1995. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. It has been with us for decades, possibly centuries. It's just that now we know about it. And you know, it was first described in 1995 in a study done amongst individuals serving in the military, young African-American men. That's when it was first described in 1995. And then looking back into the literature, there is actually evidence, even in January 1982, there is a study published of what was called a collecting duct carcinoma, a different type of kidney cancer, that actually, if you look at the actual study, it is RMC. It's just that we didn't know it was RMC. And that's, again, what keeps happening. When I first started, you know, getting involved in this field, I thought, and we all thought, that collecting duct carcinoma that I just mentioned was way more common than RMC. Now we realize, just 5 years later, that RMC is 10 times more common than collecting duct carcinoma. So as we're raising awareness and we're learning more about it, we are able to answer more the kind of questions that you have. And hopefully in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we will be able to give you more concrete answers about what you just asked. And that is the value and the power of community awareness. What you guys are doing is extremely, extremely important, because without raising community awareness, we will not be able to organize and find out when it happens, diagnose it clearly, do the research, and get some answers and help people with this disease.